Lakshmi sat alone on the edge of the old wooden cot in her tiny kitchen, watching the thin stream of rainwater slip through a crack in the roof. She had learned not to cry anymore. Tears felt like wasted water, and in that small home in Madurai, every drop of water was precious. She pressed her hands over her ears to block the sound of the rain tapping on metal pots she had placed around the floor to catch the leaks. Outside, the wind rattled the walls, but inside her heart, there was a silence that was even louder. It was the silence of a woman who carried 100 worries, but refused to let them show. She had nothing of value in the world except her family, and for them, she would sacrifice every part of herself without hesitation. Her husband worked long hours in the dusty factory, coming home every night with tired eyes and hands blackened by grease. Lakshmi never complained. She waited for him by the door with a bowl of warm rice, even when she herself had eaten nothing all day. Their little boy, Sundar, was only 6. He didn't understand why his mother looked so thin or why his father rarely smiled. He only knew that when his mother held him, he felt safe. And even when the kitchen smelled of damp walls and smoke, her arms smelled like home. One evening, when the rain stopped and the clouds lifted just enough to let the moon peek through, Sundar climbed onto Lakshmi's lap and whispered in a small, trembling voice, "Amma, will we always be poor?" Lakshmi closed her eyes and took a deep breath that hurt her chest. She wanted to tell him the truth that she didn't know how they would survive the next month. But when she opened her mouth, only the words of hope came out. "No, Kanna. One day you will grow up and you will make something so big that everyone will know your name. You will change the world." Sundar looked up at her with wide eyes. He didn't understand how a little boy who had never even left his neighborhood could change the world. But the way his mother said it made it sound real. It made it sound like he was already halfway there. Days passed, and the factory cut wages. Again, Lakshmi tried to stretch every coin. But there were nights when she had to choose between buying medicine for her husband's cough or buying milk for Sundar. She would pretend she wasn't hungry so there would be more food for them. She would press her hand to her stomach to quiet the pain. She never let her son see her suffer. She knew that children should not carry the weight of their parents' struggles. One morning, while she was washing clothes by the roadside tap, a stranger approached. He was a man with kind eyes and a tired voice. He introduced himself as a teacher at the local school. He had seen Sundar sitting outside the classroom window, trying to listen to the lessons. The teacher asked Lakshmi why the boy wasn't enrolled. Lakshmi felt her throat tighten. She looked down at her wet hands. "We cannot afford the fees," she said quietly. Her voice was so soft it was almost swallowed by the sounds of passing cycles and barking dogs. The teacher studied her face for a moment and then said, "Sometimes there are exceptions. If a child shows promise." Lakshmi looked up, surprised. She felt something warm in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. It was hope, bright and unfamiliar. She clasped her hands together and said, "Please, sir. He is a good boy. He wants to learn so much." The next week, Sundar was allowed to sit in the classroom. He had no shoes and carried a bag made from old cloth, but he held his head high every day. Lakshmi walked him to school before she went to clean the homes of wealthier families. She would watch him disappear through the gate and whisper a silent prayer that one day he would never have to worry about money or shame. At night, Sundar would tell her everything he had learned about numbers and letters, about the way electricity worked. He would talk so fast, his words tripping over each other, and Lakshmi would sit beside him and listen as if every sentence was a gift. In those moments, she forgot her hunger, her fear, her loneliness. She felt like she was part of something bigger, something that was quietly growing in the heart of her little boy. Years passed, and Sundar's love for learning only grew stronger. But life did not grow easier. One day, Lakshmi came home from work and found her husband sitting on the floor, clutching his chest. He was pale and shaking. She rushed to him and held his head in her lap, her mind spinning with panic. She knew she could not afford a doctor. She knew that even if she borrowed money, it would take years to repay, but she also knew she could not let him die. She ran to the neighbors, begging for help. A woman lent her some money. A man offered to drive them to the clinic on his bicycle. That night, as her husband slept on a narrow hospital bed, Lakshmi sat beside him and held his hand. She thought of all the times he had carried the weight of the family alone. She thought of all the nights he had come home exhausted, but still, managed a smile for Sundar, and she made herself a promise. She promised that no matter how hard life became, she would keep fighting for her husband, for her son. The doctor told her gently that her husband's heart was weak. He would not be able to return to the factory. Lakshmi felt the walls closing in on her. She had been struggling before, but now she would have to carry everything alone. She felt like the ground was slipping away beneath her feet, but when she looked over at Sundar, sitting on a plastic chair with his little hands folded in his lap, she knew she could not give up. She could not let him see her break. In the darkness of that hospital room, Lakshmi leaned over her sleeping husband and whispered, "I will take care of you. I will take care of him. I will not fail." In that moment, she did not feel like a poor woman. She did not feel like someone with nothing. She felt like a mother, and that was stronger than any hardship the world could throw at her. As dawn broke over Madurai, Lakshmi stood by the window and watched the sky turn pink and gold. She took a deep breath and felt the weight of her promise settle in her chest. She did not know how she would keep it, but she knew she would. She had nothing, but she had love, and that was enough to begin again. Lakshmi woke before the sun every morning. She would tie her hair back tightly and wash her face in cold water that made her skin sting. Then she would prepare a small breakfast of rice water for her husband and son. She had no time to think about herself. All she could think about was how to keep them fed and safe. After she sent Sundar off to school, Lakshmi would walk through the narrow lanes to a rich neighborhood where she cleaned houses. Every doorway she passed reminded her of the difference between her life and theirs. Behind those tall gates were big kitchens and soft beds and cupboards full of things she could never afford. She used to feel bitterness rising in her chest when she saw those homes, but over time, she learned to see them as something else, a reason to keep trying, a picture of what might be possible if her son's dreams came true. Inside the first house, Lakshmi scrubbed the marble floors while the owner sat reading the newspaper. She never spoke unless spoken to. Her hands were cracked from soap and water, but she kept working without complaint. She had learned that no one cared about her tiredness. She had learned that the world rewarded only results, not excuses. Every afternoon, when she took a break under a banyan tree, Lakshmi would unwrap the little parcel of leftover food she was allowed to take home. She thought about Sundar sitting in class, probably hungry because they could only afford to pack a small lunch. Sometimes the thought of him sitting there with an empty stomach made her eyes sting with tears. She tried to swallow. One evening, as Sundar sat studying by the dim light of a kerosene lamp, Lakshmi saw something that changed her. She saw the way he moved his lips as he read. She saw the way he tilted his head and frowned when he did not understand something. He was so focused, so determined. It was as if all the noise of poverty and struggle could not touch that little space inside him, where hope lived. She sat down beside him and asked softly, "What are you reading?" Sundar looked up, surprised, and said, "It is about computers. Amma, they can do many things. They can make life better." He spoke as if he had discovered something magical. Lakshmi nodded slowly, even though she did not understand much about computers. But she understood the look in his eyes. She understood that feeling like a door had opened somewhere far away. And maybe if you were brave enough, you could walk through it. As months passed, Sundar started helping neighbors fix their radios and small machines. Word spread that the pichai boy was clever. Sometimes, people would knock on their door and ask for help. Lakshmi felt something like pride when she saw them thanking her son. But pride was not enough to pay the bills. Her husband's medicine cost more than she earned in a week. She tried to work extra hours, but her body was growing weaker. At night, when she lay down, her legs would ache so badly that she had to bite her lip to stop from crying out. One rainy night, there was a knock at the door. Lakshmi opened it to find her landlord standing in the mud, holding a piece of paper. He did not greet her. He only said, "You must pay the rent by next week. If not, you must leave." After he left, Lakshmi sank to the floor. She pressed her back against the wall and let the rain soak through the doorway until her sorry. Sundar stood watching her, his schoolbooks clutched against his chest. "Amma," he whispered. Lakshmi looked up at him. She forced a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "It is nothing, Kanna. Go and study." But Sundar did not move. He came to her and knelt beside her. "Amma, one day I will earn so much money that you will never have to worry again." Lakshmi reached out and cupped his cheek in her hand. In that moment, she believed him. She believed that even if the world tried to break her, She could not be truly defeated as long as her son still carried hope. The next morning, she went to a temple and sat in the cool shade, watching the oil lamps flicker. She closed her eyes and prayed. She did not pray for riches, she prayed only for strength. She prayed for the courage to keep going one more day. When she returned home, she found Sundar waiting with a piece of paper. He handed it to her shyly. It was a letter from his teacher, saying he had been chosen to enter a special program for talented students. He would have access to better books and more learning. Lakshmi felt her heart beat faster. She knew this could change everything. But she also saw the line at the bottom of the letter, the small fee they would need to pay. It was not much for some families, but for her, it felt impossible. That night, as her husband slept and Sundar studied, Lakshmi sat alone, staring at the letter. She felt trapped between fear and hope. She wanted to believe that things would get better, but she knew that believing was not enough. She would have to fight harder than ever before. She took a deep breath and folded the letter neatly. She tucked it into a small tin where she kept her most important things: a broken bangle from her wedding day, a photograph of her mother, and now this letter that held her son's future. In the darkness, Lakshmi whispered to herself, "I will find a way." She did not know how, but she knew she could not let her son's dream slip away. The next day, she went to see a woman she cleaned for. The woman was sitting in her garden, wearing a bright sari and holding a cup of tea. Lakshmi stood at the edge of the veranda, feeling her heart pound in her chest. "Madam," she began, her voice shaking, "I need help." The woman looked up, surprised. Lakshmi had never asked for anything before. "My son has been given a chance, but we cannot pay." The woman listened silently for a long moment. Lakshmi thought she would refuse, but then the woman sighed and said, "I will give you an advance on your salary, but you must keep working for me until the debt is paid." Lakshmi bowed her head, tears filling her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered as she walked home, carrying the money in her hand. She felt something lift off her shoulders. She knew it was only a small step, but it was a step forward, and sometimes that was all you needed to keep going. That night, she handed the money to Sundar and said, "You will go, you will learn, you will make something of yourself." He looked at her with such love that for a moment, she forgot all her pain. In that little house, with the rain tapping on the roof, Lakshmi felt a quiet certainty settle inside her. She had nothing, but she had faith, and that was enough. The days began to change in small, almost invisible ways. Sundar left earlier in the morning to reach the special program. The walk was long, but he never complained. Lakshmi packed him the same simple meal every day, folding the roti and vegetables in a clean cloth she washed by hand each night. Sometimes, when she watched him disappear into the crowded street, her chest tightened with both pride and worry. She wondered if he was strong enough to carry all the expectations she placed on his thin shoulders. Her husband grew weaker as the weeks passed. He spent most of the day resting on the cot by the window. Lakshmi tried to keep the house quiet so he could sleep, but there were always sounds she could not control: the neighbors arguing, the goats bleating in the alley, the call of the vegetable vendor. In those moments, she wished she could build walls so thick that nothing could disturb their little world. One afternoon, Lakshmi was washing clothes in the corner of the courtyard when she heard her husband coughing. She dropped the wet cloth and ran to him. He was sitting up, clutching his chest and gasping for breath. Her heart lurched as she realized he needed more medicine. She knelt beside him and held his hand, feeling the thinness of his skin. "I will get the medicine," she whispered. "We cannot afford it," he rasped, shaking his head. Lakshmi looked at him fiercely. "I will find a way." She did not wait for his reply. She stood up, wiped her hands on her sari, and went to the kitchen. She opened the tin where she kept a few coins, but there was not enough. She closed her eyes and tried to think. Then she remembered a small gold earring, just one, the other long lost, that had belonged to her mother. It was the last piece of jewelry she owned. Lakshmi took the earring in her palm. It felt heavier than she expected. She turned it over and over, feeling as if she was letting go of the last tie to her past. But she knew her husband's life mattered more than any memory. At the pawn shop, the man behind the counter barely looked at her as he weighed the earring. He named a price that made her heart sink, but she nodded and took the money. As she left the shop, she felt something like shame burn in her chest, but she forced herself to lift her head. She was doing this for her family, and there was no shame in that. She bought the medicine and came home to find Sundar sitting beside his father, reading aloud from a book. Her husband looked up, his eyes tired but grateful. Lakshmi handed him the pills and touched his forehead. She felt a small relief when she saw some color return to his face. That night, as she sat in the corner and watched them sleep, she thought about how many pieces of herself she had given away over the years, her strength, her health, her few possessions. But she also thought about how each sacrifice was like a brick, building something stronger than she had ever known, a foundation her son could stand on. The next morning, as she walked Sundar to the edge of the lane, he stopped and looked up at her. "Amma, why do you always smile even when things are hard?" he asked. Lakshmi was quiet for a moment. Then she bent down so her face was level with his. "Because smiling tells the world it cannot break me," she said softly. Sundar nodded as if he understood, and maybe in some way, he did. The days grew hotter as summer came. Lakshmi worked longer hours, cleaning more houses to make up for the medicine and rent. Sometimes, when she walked home in the evening, her legs felt like they would collapse. But every time she thought she could not take another step, she pictured Sundar's face when he talked about computers and science. That thought gave her strength. One evening, Sundar came home with a paper clutched in his hand. His eyes were bright with excitement. "Emma," he called, running inside, "I won the science prize. They are going to take us to Chennai for a competition." Lakshmi's heart lifted and fell at the same time. She was proud beyond words, but she knew such trips cost money. She took the paper and read it slowly. The school would cover most expenses, but there was still a small fee. She looked at Sundar's hopeful face and knew she could not say no. "You will go," she said firmly. "We will manage." The next day, she went to the home she cleaned and asked for extra work. She washed more clothes, scrubbed more floors. Her hands became raw and red, but she did not care. At night, when she finally lay down to sleep, she felt a deep ache in her bones. But she also felt a quiet pride that she could not explain. On the morning Sundar left for Chennai, Lakshmi walked him to the bus station. She packed his clothes in an old bag and slipped a small packet of food into his hand. "Be brave," she whispered as the bus rumbled to life. "I will, Amma," he promised. She watched the bus pull away, her heart so full it hurt. She felt like a part of her was leaving with him, but she also knew he was going toward something bigger than any of them could imagine. When she walked back home, the house felt too quiet. She went to the corner where Sundar always kept his books and sat there, touching the worn covers. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine him standing on a stage in Chennai, holding a prize in his hands. She prayed that when he looked out into the crowd, he would feel her love reaching all the way to him. That night, as she lay awake, she thought about all the ways life had tried to break her. But every time, she had found a way to rise again. She knew there would be more struggles ahead, more sacrifices, more days when she would wonder if she was strong enough. But she also knew that no matter what happened, she would keep going, because she had nothing. But she had purpose, and that was enough. The bus ride to Chennai was the first time Sundar had ever left Madurai. He sat by the window, clutching the strap of his bag, feeling a strange mix of fear and excitement. He watched the fields and small villages pass by, thinking about how big the world must be beyond the roads he knew. He also thought about his mother, picturing her standing by the stove, stirring a pot of rice, her face tired but kind. In Madurai, Lakshmi tried to keep herself busy. She cleaned houses, fetched water, and cooked for her husband. But no matter what she did, she could not stop thinking about Sundar. She wondered if he had enough to eat, if he was sleeping well, if he felt alone. Every evening, she walked to the little temple near their house and lit a small lamp for him. She would close her eyes and whisper, "Please take care of my boy." After 3 days, a letter arrived. It was written in careful handwriting. Sundar described the big city, the tall buildings, and the way everything seemed so fast and bright. He wrote about the science competition, how he stood on the stage and showed the judges his project about how computers could help villages. Lakshmi read every word twice. Then she folded the letter and pressed it to her heart. When Sundar returned home, he was different in small ways. His eyes seemed brighter, his voice more certain. He had not won the first prize, but he had been given a special mention, and his teachers told him he had a gift. Lakshmi listened to him talk and felt a pride so strong it made her forget her tiredness. One evening, Sundar sat beside her and said, "Amma, one day I want to study in America." Lakshmi looked at him carefully. America was a word she had only heard in passing, a place so far away she could not even imagine it. But she saw how serious he was. She saw the spark in his eyes, the same spark she had seen when he first read about computers. "Then you must," she said quietly. "If that is your dream, you must go. But it will cost a lot," Sundar said, his voice small. Lakshmi took his hand. "We will find a way." As months turned into years, Sundar kept working harder. He studied late into the night, sometimes falling asleep with his head on his books. Lakshmi would cover him with an old shawl and whisper a prayer. She knew she could not give him the things other children had: new clothes, good food, a quiet place to study, but she gave him everything she could. Her belief died one evening, when the air was heavy with the smell of rain. A man came to their door. He was a government officer from the education board. Lakshmi invited him in, her hands trembling. He handed her a letter. It said that Sundar had been selected to attend an advanced training program in Delhi. It was an honor given to very few. Lakshmi felt her heart beating so fast she thought she might faint. Delhi was even farther than Chennai. It was the capital, a place of important people and big opportunities. When Sundar came home from school, she gave him the letter. His face lit up, and for a moment, he looked like the same little boy who used to ask her why they were poor. "Amma, this means I can learn so much more," he whispered. "Then you will go," she said, though her chest felt hollow. The night before he left, Lakshmi could not sleep. She sat by the window, listening to the rain tapping softly on the roof. She thought about how far they had come. She thought about all the nights she had wondered if she could keep going. She also thought about all the nights still ahead. When the dawn came, she packed his clothes carefully. She slipped a small packet of sweets into the bag, something she had saved for a special moment. She knew he might feel scared or lonely in Delhi, and she wanted him to have something that tasted of home. At the bus station, she hugged him tightly. She did not care that people were watching. She pressed her cheek to his hair and breathed in the smell of soap and old books. "Be strong," she whispered. "I will, Amma," Sundar said, his voice steady. She watched the bus pull away, feeling like a piece of her heart was gone with it. In Delhi, Sundar discovered a world so different from Madurai that it felt like another planet. There were computers everywhere, and the teachers spoke about things he had only read in old magazines. Sometimes he felt small and unsure, but he would remember his mother's face and the way she always believed in him. Lakshmi's days grew even harder. Without Sundar to help, she had to do more work herself. Her husband was growing weaker, spending most days lying in bed. The doctor came once a month and gave her the same warnings. She listened silently, holding the medicine in her hand, feeling the cold weight of fear in her chest. One afternoon, as she scrubbed the kitchen floor, she felt dizzy. The room spun, and she had to grab the edge of the counter to stay upright. She knew she was pushing herself too hard, but there was no other way. She thought of Sundar studying in Delhi, wearing the same warm clothes, trying so hard to make something of himself. She would not let her weakness take this chance from him. That evening, she walked home slowly, her legs trembling. When she reached the door, she saw her husband awake, waiting for her. He looked at her with tired eyes. "You are killing yourself," he said softly. Lakshmi sat beside him and took his hand. "If I die, at least he will have a future," she whispered. Her husband closed his eyes. A tear slid down his cheek. "You are stronger than anyone I have ever known," he said. Lakshmi did not reply. She did not need to. In that quiet room, they both knew there was nothing she would not sacrifice for her son. Later that night, she sat by the small lamp, writing a letter to Sundar. She told him not to worry about them. She told him to study hard and be proud. She told him that one day he would stand so high that the world would see how far he had come. She folded the letter and held it against her heart. In that moment, she felt both the pain of everything she had lost and the beauty of everything she still hoped for. She had nothing, but she had love that would never end, and that was enough. The days after Sundar left for Delhi felt longer than any days Lakshmi could remember. She woke before the first light, moving through the house with quiet steps so her husband could rest. She lit the small lamp in the corner and pressed her palms together, praying for strength. She prayed for Sundar to stay healthy and safe, and for her own body to keep working even when her spirit grew tired. Every evening, she waited by the post office, hoping for a letter. Sometimes one came, folded neatly in an envelope with her name written in careful letters. Sundar described the big city, the tall buildings, the computers that seemed to be everywhere. He wrote about the library, full of books he could borrow, and about the teachers who told him he was gifted. Lakshmi read each letter slowly, letting every word soak into her heart. She could hear his voice in her mind, bright and curious, and it made the quiet house feel less emptied out. One day, she came home to find her husband sitting up, holding one of Sundar's letters in his hand. His eyes were soft as he looked at her. "He is becoming something big," he whispered. Lakshmi nodded. "Yes, he is." But even as she said it, her heart squeezed with worry. She knew that every step Sundar took forward would cost more money. Fees for exams, new books, bus fares. She also knew her husband's health was failing. The medicine was becoming harder to buy. Late one evening, she sat by the window with her sewing. She was patching Sundar's old school shirt to send to him, hoping he could still use it under his new uniform. As she stitched, she remembered when he had been just a baby, so small she could hold him with one arm. She remembered the first time he had said the word, "Emma." She remembered all the nights she had rocked him to sleep while her own stomach ached with hunger. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she kept sewing. There was no time to stop. Weeks later, a man from the education board visited again. Lakshmi offered him water, her hands shaking. He told her that Sundar had been selected for a scholarship interview that could change everything. If he was chosen, he would be sent to study at a big university in America. Lakshmi's breath caught in her throat. She looked at the man, unsure if she had heard correctly. "America," she whispered. "Yes," the man said. "He has talent. The interview is the first step." After he left, Lakshmi sat down hard on the cot. She felt the walls spinning around her. She thought of the tiny kitchen, the cracked roof, the bills stacked in the corner. She thought of Sundar standing in a place she had never even seen on a map. When her husband woke, she told him slowly, afraid the news might be too much. He listened without speaking. When she finished, he reached for her hand and squeezed it. Weakly, "This is what we have been working for," he said. "Lakshmi nodded. "Yes, but how will we pay for the travel, the documents?" Her husband closed his eyes. "Somehow," he said. That night, Lakshmi lay awake listening to the rain tapping on the roof. She felt fear like a cold hand on her heart, but she also felt something stronger, hope, so bright it almost hurt. The next morning, she packed the old shawl Sundar loved and some small gifts. She borrowed money from 3 neighbors and promised she would repay every rupee. Then she traveled to Delhi by train, holding her bundle on her lap the whole way. When she arrived, she stood outside the school gates, waiting. Finally, Sundar appeared, taller and thinner than she remembered, wearing a borrowed sweater too big for his shoulders. When he saw her, his face broke into a smile so wide it made her eyes fill with tears. "Emma," he called. Running to her, she held him tight, breathing in his scent. She felt the months of worry melt away in that one moment. Inside the small visitor's room, she unpacked the gifts, a packet of sweets, a new pen, the patched shirt. Sundar touched each item as if it were treasure. "Emma," he said softly, "do you think I can really go to America?" Lakshmi looked at him carefully. His eyes were full of hope and fear. "Yes," she said, "if you work hard, you can go anywhere, but it will cost so much," he said. She took his hands in hers. "I will find a way." In the days that followed, Lakshmi returned to Madurai and worked harder than she ever had. She cleaned more houses, washed more clothes. Her hands became raw, the skin cracking open in places. Sometimes she thought she might fall down from weakness, but she would remember Sundar's face, and it would give her strength. One evening, she visited a wealthy family she worked for. She waited by the gate until the lady came out. "Madam," Lakshmi began, her voice steady though her heart pounded, "my son has been given a chance to study in America. I need help to pay for his papers and travel." The lady studied her face for a long moment. She said nothing. Then she nodded. "You are a good woman," she said. "I will help you with some of it." Lakshmi bowed her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. When she came home, she knelt by the lamp and prayed. She prayed for courage. She prayed for Sundar to pass the interview. She prayed that one day he would stand tall and proud, knowing how far he had come. Days turned into weeks. Then, one afternoon, a telegram arrived. Sundar had been selected. Lakshmi read the message over and over, her heart leaping in her chest. She felt dizzy with relief, with joy, with fear of what came next. That night, she sat by the window, watching the stars. She thought about how life had tried to take everything from her, but somehow, she still had this. She had nothing, but she had a son who was going to change the world. And that was enough. The morning Sundar was to leave for America. Lakshmi woke before dawn. The house was so quiet it felt like it was holding its breath. She moved carefully through the darkness. Lighting the small lamp in the corner, she whispered her prayers with her palms pressed together, her voice shaking. She prayed for Sundar's safety, for his health, for his heart to remain kind no matter how high he climbed. She packed the last of his things in a small suitcase she had borrowed from a neighbor. Inside, she placed the patched shirt, the old shawl, and a small cloth pouch with a pinch of holy ash. She knew he might never need these things in a place so far away, but she wanted him to carry a piece of home. When Sundar stepped out of the bedroom, he looked taller than ever. His face was serious, but his eyes were bright with something she had never seen before, a certainty that he was stepping into a future he was meant for. "Amma," he said softly, "are you sure you want me to go?" Lakshmi reached up to touch his cheek. Her hand was rough and cracked, but he leaned into it as if it were the softest thing in the world. "You must go," she whispered. "You have worked too hard to stop now." Her husband was sitting up on the cot, his breathing slow. He looked at Sundar and gave a tired smile. "Make us proud," he rasped. "I will," Sundar said, his voice steady. At the train station, Lakshmi held Sundar's hand until the last possible moment. She looked at his face, memorizing every line. She thought of the little boy who used to fall asleep in her lap, and the young man standing before her, about to cross an ocean. "Write to me," she said, her voice breaking. "I will, Amma," he promised. When the train began to move, Sundar leaned out the window and waved. Lakshmi stood there until the last carriage disappeared. Then she turned away, pressing her hand to her chest. She felt as if her heart had been cut in two. The days after he left were the hardest she had ever known. The house felt empty in a way she could not describe. She moved through it like a ghost, folding his clothes, touching the books he had left behind. Every evening, she lit the lamp and sat by the window, waiting for news. Weeks later, the first letter came. It was covered in foreign stamps. She held it carefully, her hands trembling. Inside, Sundar described the university, the tall glass buildings, the computers that were faster than anything he had seen. He wrote about how everyone seemed so smart and confident. Lakshmi read the letter over and over. She could hear his voice. In every word. She wrote back in slow, careful handwriting. She told him she was proud. She told him she was well, even though her body ached and the days were long. She did not want him to worry. One evening, as she was cleaning a house, the lady of the house called her over. "Lakshmi," she said, "I read about your son in the newspaper. He has won an award for innovation." Lakshmi felt her knees weaken. "An award?" she whispered. The lady showed her the newspaper. There was a small photograph of Sundar standing with other students, holding a certificate. Lakshmi touched the image with her fingertips. She felt something bright and fierce rise in her chest. When she came home, she placed the newspaper beside the lamp. She sat and stared at it for a long time. Her husband, who had grown so thin he could barely sit up, watched her with tired eyes. "You did this," he said softly. Lakshmi shook her head. "He did this because you believed," he said. Tears slid down her face, but she did not wipe them away. Months passed, and Sundar kept writing. He told her about his studies, about the people he met, about the dreams he had for the future. Sometimes he sent a little money, and Lakshmi saved every rupee. She did not spend it, even when they needed it. She wanted him to know that she could still stand on her own feet. One night, her husband took her hand and whispered, "Promise me you will live to see all that he will become." Lakshmi pressed her forehead to his. "I promise," she whispered. The next morning, he was gone. Lakshmi sat beside his body, her heart so heavy she could not breathe. She thought of all the years they had carried their burdens together. She thought of the way he had always believed in her strength. When the funeral was over and the neighbors had left, she sat alone in the house. She felt as if the walls were pressing in. But then she looked at the newspaper clipping on the shelf, and she knew she could not give up. She wrote to Sundar that night, her tears falling on the paper. She told him his father had gone peacefully. She told him not to come back yet. She told him to keep working, to keep believing. Your father was proud, she wrote, and so am I. When she sealed the letter, she pressed it to her heart. In that moment, she knew she had lost so much, but she also knew she had something no one could ever take away. She had nothing, but she had raised a son who would honor their sacrifices, and that was enough. The days after her husband's death passed in a blur. Lakshmi moved through them like a woman half awake, doing her work without thinking, washing the same dishes, sweeping the same floors. Sometimes, when she stopped to catch her breath, she would feel the empty space beside her and remember he was gone. But each time the grief tried to pull her under, she would look at Sundar's letters. She kept them in a small box by her pillow, tied with a piece of red string. Every night, she would untie the bundle and read them one by one, reminding herself that her sacrifices had not been in vain. As the months went by, the letters changed. Sundar wrote about projects that were getting attention from big companies. He wrote about people who wanted to interview him, professors who believed he would make something important. In each letter, he said the same thing again and again: I will make you proud. Lakshmi saved every rupee he sent. She would not touch the money, no matter how hard things became. It was for his future, not for her. She wanted him to know she could still take care of herself. Even when her body ached and her hands could no longer grip the broom for long, she kept working. One evening, as the sun was setting and the air was full of the smell of jasmine, a man came to her door. He was wearing a crisp shirt and holding a letter. He introduced himself as someone who worked with Sundar. Lakshmi invited him inside, her heart beating fast. Your son has achieved something very special, the man said. He has created technology that will help millions. There will be a ceremony in Delhi to honor him. He wants you to come. Lakshmi felt the room tilt. She pressed her hand to her chest, afraid she might faint. Me, she whispered. Yes, the man said gently. He wants you to be there when he receives the award. After he left, Lakshmi sat in the quiet house, the letter in her lap. She thought of all the years she had worked in silence, of all the nights she had gone to sleep hungry. She thought of the little boy who had once asked if they would always be poor. She began to cry, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Joy. When she traveled to Delhi, it was the farthest she had ever been from Madurai. The train was crowded, and the journey was long, but every mile felt like proof that nothing was impossible. When she stepped off the train, Sundar was waiting. He was taller, stronger, his hair combed neatly, but when he hugged her, he was still her little boy, Amma. He whispered, his voice thick. You came. She looked up at him, seeing not just her son, but everything they had endured together. I would go anywhere to see you, she said. The ceremony was held in a large hall filled with people Lakshmi could hardly look at without feeling shy. There were officials, businessmen, and even reporters with cameras. She sat in the front row, her hands folded tightly in her lap. When Sundar's name was called, the room filled with applause. She watched him walk across the stage, his head held high. He accepted the award and then turned to the microphone. I want to thank my mother, he began, his voice strong and clear. She had nothing, but she gave me everything. Lakshmi felt the tears come again, warm and unstoppable. She covered her mouth with her hand as the audience stood to applaud. In that moment, she did not feel like the poor woman who had scrubbed floors and pawned her last earring. She felt like someone who had built a legacy with nothing but her faith and her love. After the ceremony, Sundar took her to a small restaurant. She had never been to such a place before. He ordered food she did not know the names of, but she ate every bite because he wanted her to. Emma, he said quietly as they finished, I want you to come live with me. I can take care of you now. Lakshmi looked down at her hands, remembering all the times she had dreamed of this moment. But when she raised her eyes, they were calm. I will come, she said, but only when I know you are happy and settled. Until then, I will stay in Madurai. Sundar started to argue, but she placed her hand over his. I want you to know I am proud, she said softly. You are my greatest blessing. He lowered his head, and she saw his shoulders shake as he tried not to cry. When she returned home, the neighbors gathered to hear about the ceremony. She showed them the newspaper with Sundar's picture on the front page. They passed it around with wide eyes, murmuring in awe. Later that night, She sat alone by the lamp, the newspaper folded neatly beside her. She thought about how far they had come, from the leaking roof and the days without food to this moment. She knew there would always be challenges. Life never stopped testing people. But she also knew that no matter what came, she had already proven something important. She had nothing, but she had raised a son who had become a light for others. And that was enough.